Hi, welcome back to Trail Buddy. Today we're going to continue our bike build series on our resto mod. So we're on to our next step. We're going to try to fit all this mess of aftermarket wires into this frame. So we'll go through the parts and pieces, where to mount it, how to tackle it, and how to run the wires through the frame. So we've got our 12-volt wire harness here that we'll have to run through the belly of the frame. But there's also all the parts and pieces that run that motor. So we need to figure out how we want to mount them in here, because a lot of the aftermarket stuff don't have exact bolt-on bracketry on how to put it in. So the first one we're going to have to figure out is we've got our coil here. This is a 2-coil wire system, so it doesn't necessarily need to ground to the frame, but we've got a nice mounting bracket here. We got the next one. We've got our voltage regulator. There's a tab here. We'll figure out how to get that in there, where to mount that. We've got our battery box. Now this needs a little bit of tweaking because these guys, everything that you see online, and I think maybe someday we'll work to make our own battery box, but this was very convenient for the 12-volt batteries that are very plentiful. But what happens is these are designed for the aftermarket frames, which their seat pans that they have on here are domed upward, so they've got a lot more clearance. So we don't want to short out our positive lead on our battery. So what we need to do essentially is we take this, and sometimes we'll bolt it to the bike and we'll tap it forward, but essentially we need to take this tab and we need to bend these tabs back a little bit and get as close as we can to that gas tank in here, so that way we can fit our battery. And we'll also want to go down as far as we can before it hits the bottom of the battery. And we'll go over the details of that, how to kind of tweak this to get this to fit in. Essentially, we're only doing it just as much as so we don't hit the bottom of our seat. So we'll do the rough in with this, and then when we go to put the seat in, we'll be able to leave this loose, and we'll take this on and off, and we'll get that to where it just fits perfect. So we've got our battery box. We also have our CDI controller. Now this one here is the one that comes with the motor. There are no provisions here for mounting, so we'll have to figure out something for that. Maybe we can come up with a solution that we can also supply to you guys. So we'll figure out where we want to go with this. Now this particular engine, we're going to go lazy. We're going to add our electric start, which, you know, if you're out riding around, it's just kind of nice. You don't always have to kickstart it, but we'll figure out where this guy's got to go. We're also going to have to make our own little wire harness to fit with the aftermarket wire harness that we have, and we'll go through the details of that and why. We've got our rear brake light switch. We'll run that through. So a lot of these pieces that I'm talking about are parts that you're going to want to install before we put this on the motor, because we want to have access to the bottom. So I'll try to list out which ones that you need to put in before you start bolting it onto your engine, so you don't run into that, so you're not taking stuff in and out or apart and together. And so we've got our switch here that we use for our electric start. I've got this laid out just because we're going to have to tap into it with the wire harness that we're going to make. We also have our ignition key switch set. So we'll get this installed up into the frame here. Now it's important to put this in before you put the gas tank in. It's also nice when you're laying in your wire harness to be able to get everything to lay correctly and where you want it. There's a lot of extra parts in here. So what we're doing is we're adapting this from a clone bike to our aftermarket harness. So the nice thing you get is you get 2 keys with the switch, but you also get some of these other seat latch locks. Now these are designed for the aftermarket frame. We're obviously using an original Honda frame. We won't use these parts and pieces. So we'll throw those aside. And then last, we've got our wire grommet here, which goes up front here and cleans everything up and keeps the wire harness isolated from the frame. So those are the parts and pieces that we're going to try to tackle on this series in this video, and we'll get into it. Okay, so the first piece we're going to tackle is we're going to try to mount our coil here. So I went and found a length of fastener that will work, And what we're going to do is we're going to mount it to the original coil bracket inside the frame. So just for reference, for what wire harness we're working with this particular build, is we're using TB515. It's the 12-volt simple main harness kit for non-electric start motors. But what we're going to do is we're going to showcase and show, we're going to make a harness, and we'll have this harness available later to purchase as a kit. But what we're going to do here is, so that way we've got less available, or less parts and pieces that you have to sift through, and it's more or less a kit that will have an add-on in the future. But for right now, I just wanted to give a reference of what wire harness we're using and what part we're moving on to next. What we'll do is we'll show where we're going to mount this guy inside this frame here, and we'll get ready to do that right now. So as you can see, a good view from the bottom is the next piece that we installed after our coil was our voltage regulator here. So what we did is we installed it on the bottom of the original coil mounting flange and tipped it, I don't know, we'll call it 45, 30 degrees towards the front of the bike. That way we can get the plug mounted on it. And then here we've got our coil run through the normal part of the frame, but we have that mounted on top of that same coil mount. So in here, we've got these mounted down, and this is the most best place to mount these guys. And what we're going to do is we'll have to modify the harness just a little bit, not necessarily the wires, but the loom or the black tape going over it to the backside. Because how it's set up for is, again, it's set up for these guys being mounted towards the back like a clone motorcycle. So we'll show you how to do that, but this is exactly where you want to mount these guys for good retention so they don't roll around or rattle around in your frame. Okay, we're on to our next final loose part. So we've got our new racing CDI. It says it right here. So this guy here, unfortunately, does not have any kind of mounting provisions whatsoever. So there's a couple different versions that you'll see with these. This is the one that we have with our motor, and it's actually a pretty nice high revving CDI. What we're going to do is we're going to come up with our own bracket that will mount on the same hole location that we put our voltage regulator on. So I'm going to try to get some dimensions. We're going to do a little napkin sketch, and I think what we'll do is we'll make a little sleeve where this slides inside. And offset from that, we'll have a mounting tab to where we can use that same bolt. Obviously, we'll have to get a longer bolt, but we use that same fastener that mounts that voltage regulator on. And there's plenty of real estate behind the gas tank, so that way we don't have this guy just flopping around inside. So we'll put that right in the back, and we'll get some close-up shots of that, of where we're going to mount it, and then we'll get some dimensions, and we'll start engineering up a bracket that, one, we'll make for this build, and two, we will have available for everybody else to utilize too. All right, so I've got this in here hovering exactly where I would like it to mount. So around this is what we're going to have to figure out, design, and engineer for our bracket. And this location right here is a nice safe spot because there's nothing taking up real estate there behind the gas tank. So what we'll do here is we'll get some dimensions and we'll lay it out on some cardboard, and then we'll move on to the engineering and design machining room, and we'll make up a bracket in the 3D printer. Okay, so I've got it in my mind. I'm visualizing how I want it to mount. Now this is part of the fun, right, of doing these resto mods or these projects, is kind of coming up with some cool challenges to challenge yourself. So what I want is I want some kind of a cradle to hold this up into that area that we've got that last video from. So I know that I'm going to want to have a pocket here, all right, that we're going to want this guy to set into. And I know I'm going to have a little bit of wall thickness of some kind to be able to support it. And we know roughly here, all right, we'll call that the center line of our bracket. We know that's where we're going to mount with our M6 bolt. So there's a little bit of stuff that we have to do in terms of like spacing, because we're going to want this to kind of come out around and cradle up. And then we're going to want this to kind of go around. So we've got our little mounting flange. So I think what we'll do is we'll get the dimensions of that. And this is right here what we'll print. So let's see, we've got 0. All right, so let's call that 37. And then this way, which is really kind of tough, maybe we'll use these little tabs as kind of the press fit. We'll call that 30. So inside dimension of our little rectangle, we're going to want 30. So when we're in the CAD, we'll figure out what we want here for our wall thickness. And then I know I want that fastener centered. And I'll just download some kind of 3D file so that way I know I've got plenty of clearance here for my hex head that I don't run into the sidewall. So I think what it'll end up looking like, and we'll also have a bottom on this because we don't want it to fall through. So I think what we'll end up looking like is we'll have, you know, kind of our inside pocket here. We'll have our outside piece. And then this will come down. And we'll have our mounting flange like this. Radius lines. And we'll go here. All right, and this will have a bottom. So if we do a little dotted line, that here is what we're going to shoot for. So that way, when we take our fastener, that will go right through here, and we'll be able to mount this in conjunction with that voltage regulator on the bottom. So that way this guy will sit right in there, and we'll move this over to the CAD, and we'll figure out what this needs to look like in real life. All right, now we're over at my engineering and design company, and we've got our cardboard sketch for our CDI module for our bracket. So we're going to work in SolidWorks here, and I'm going to try to get this into the tube and get it to where I think I'm going to try to go for somewhat of a press fit. And then in the end, we'll probably take a zip tie and go over the top and keep it in this little cup piece here. But I've got my rough dimensions. Kind of know roughly what I want to look at, so we'll dive right into the CAD and we'll make a 3D model. Okay, so I went ahead and I already have designed it and drew it up, so we can kind of keep this moving forward. But I rolled everything back so we can kind of see what I did to get there. And now there's all kinds of different softwares you can use. The SolidWorks version is really kind of expensive, but I use it for design and engineering for manufacturing equipment, so I got the luxury of having access to this, but there's other ones out there you can use. So we're going to be setting this up for a 3D print, and I'll go through the steps that I chose to get there. So first, we made our block. I know my inside dimension, I wanted roughly about 30 by 37 millimeters, and I'm going to go about 25 millimeters high for our little holder, cup holder. So then next, extruded a pocket or hole in there. So that way it can accept the CDI body. And this one is the dimension of 30 by 37. Now I'll probably go maybe 31 just to give it a little bit more clearance here, because we've got our piece here with the fins, and these inside, it'll end up making a little radius in the printer, so I can't have it too tight, but I want to be able to pinch on it. So then what I did after that is, I know we wanted a little mounting tab to where we could mount on the old stock coil bracket, and clearance for our M6 fastener there. And then to pinch the center of our CDI, so that way I made this dimension a little bit longer, and then this one should be 1-to-1, so we'll call that interference fit, and that'll pinch on the center and hold it in good. So now, say we've got our model all built, nice and pretty, first prototype. I'm going to add some nice radiuses in here to keep it, you know, some nice fillets here to keep that strong, keep the edges from being sharp. I'm going to do a little clearance here to make sure that I don't hit the head of my fastener. I already measured that. I went with the biggest one we had, which was like a flange bolt, and that was about 14 millimeters. And then finished it all off with some nice radiuses around the whole outside. So from there, now that I got my solid model, saved it as an STL, and then jumped over to my slicer software, and we have our 3D printed part. Oop, there we go. So this is showing kind of fun, making this thing layer by layer. So I'm going to go with a carbon fiber nylon. So that way that fiber fill will make it really strong. And the nylon will be solvent resistant just in case gas ever gets down in there. And it'll be a really tough little part. So after this, we save that and we export it over to our little G code, and then we bring it over to our machine. So now we'll check out our machine, see how it's running. And I started it a little while ago, just so we didn't have to watch the whole thing run. And we'll show a little footage of that going and it finishing up. So we'll get this off the printer and we'll do some test fitting. All right, we've got the printer loaded up. It's been running for some time. So we've got the carbon fiber nylon making our part. Got my little hot box inside here, keeping it warm, keeping it from sucking in any moisture. It's pretty hygroscopic stuff, but it's super, super strong. And it won't melt with gas on it, which is my most important thing. But we've got it in there, and we are growing parts. Now we just wait. All right, we're done. Let her cool down for a few minutes. Open up the printer. And we'll peel our part off the build plate. And we got it. All right, moment of truth. We'll see if I did everything correctly. Ooh. That fits nice. Yeah, we might not even have to do a zip tie. So yeah, so we'll mount this right on the extra spot for the OEM coil bracket, and then this will go up towards the back of the bike. All right, we got that made. Let's go install it. All right, we're back from Spark Manufacturing. We made our cool 3D bracket. So what we did is I've got it to be almost a press fit, so it's nice in there tight. I ran a zip tie around the whole body here just to make sure it doesn't bounce out. So what we're going to do is we're going to mount this on top of that original coil mount towards the back of the frame. And then we're going to take our voltage regulator here and we're going to pinch that on the bottom side. So we're going to have a bolt going through here with a nut on the back. Then we're going to tip this towards the front so we can still get access and plug this in, but still have room to put our gas tank and all of our parts around through the front of the engine. So I'll get this installed and we'll get some photos of it. I got the frame off the engine again. We'll probably maybe 1 or 2 more times do that. Right now we're just trying to dry fit all our electrical components in there and get them nice and tidy. And then what you can do too is watch us and save yourself some time going in and out with your particular project if you want to mount the way that we have our stuff together. So we'll get this in here, back up on the bike, and then we'll continue fitting all of our electrical components. So now we've got our coil, our voltage regulator, and our CDI mounted in our cool new custom bracket, and we're ready to mount our wire harness. But just before I'm ready to do that, we're going to go ahead and make our electric start wire harness. And I think what would be really nice is what we'll do is we'll cut a little slit and our loom here. And then on the other end, this is the end that goes in the headlight bucket. And we'll fish that wire through here. So that way it keeps it looking nice. So there's not like another wire on the outside of this. Because once we put this through the bike, it comes out through here and we bring it up to our headlight bucket. Everything will look really clean, neat, and tidy. So let's move on to that electric start wire harness next. All right, so we've got our wire harness kit made up here. Won't bore you with all the details of that, but for what we need to know now is we're going to take this loom here and we're going to fish that harness through this so it looks good. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to get our knife out and we're going to be careful not to cut any wires. So I'm going to kind of hold it like this and make an incision. Let's say it's about 3/4 of an inch long, real close to the end here. Then we're going to do the same thing on this side, this port here that would be into the headlight bucket. I'm going to grab that, make a cut, being careful not to cut any wires. Then I've got a little piece of wire here, so old wire hanger, anything will work. What we need to do is we're going to take this into that incision and we're going to work it. Now I took care to make sure that I have the cut. You see how this is kind of elongated? I have it on the same side or plane. So we've got our wire, or our heavy wire. So there we are, we're through it. Like that. So now here, I'm going to take this wire, I'll bend that 90 degrees. And I'm going to take my wire harness that I made, and I've covered my plug ends with some, this is just white electrical tape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this right next to this, and I'm going to hook it around. All right, so I've got my two connectors taped together, and I've got it around my little J hook I made. And then finally, I'm going to take my electrical tape, and I'm going to go around and just make myself a nice smooth wire pull. Doesn't need to be super pretty because it's just meant to hold those two plug-ins on my little fish wire so that way it doesn't get stuck as I pull it through. So now we will take this, put it into that slot that I cut, and we will pull those two wires through. If you feel any kind of resistance, you want to make sure that you're not hooking on any wire. So now there we go, I got it through. So that's just a little kind of tutorial how to fish wires through that loom, so that way we can hide the two wires here to make it look good when it's installed. So now we'll get this, we'll lay it into the bike, and we'll see how it looks. All right, we got our wire harness taken care of. We've got our extra little electric start wire harness fished through the loom there. Now we're ready to take the frame and put it onto the engine. So we'll grab the frame, we'll put that on this engine, and we'll fish and lay the wire harness in. And then we'll go over the hard frame grommet that isolates the wire harness coming out to the headlight bucket. So I'll grab the frame and we'll put that on. We'll throw our bolts in, kind of temporary. We won't fix them totally tight yet, just in case we need to take something off. But we'll get it onto the motor and we'll lay the wire harness into the bike. Okay, motor to the frame. So we've got our coil mounted onto the old original mounting bracket. So we'll put our first top one on. Okay. Make sure we're not pinching anything down here. Get that on. All right, so again, we're just doing this temporary. We'll get that mounted up. We're making sure we're not hitting anything. Everything looks good. And now, I'm gonna lower the table and we will fish our wire harness through. So, we've got the front here with the loom that we've got our extra harness in. And we'll get this in. And it's a little tedious, but you just have to pull it through in a plug by plug. Careful not to rip anything too hard. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to name this bike Rusty because as much work as we did cleaning, scraping, and painting, there is copious amounts of rust in this frame yet. All right, so about here. All right, so we're going to get it to about, all right, so that's about the right length. I'm not seeing the end of the loom yet, and I know that I can move around and get to the headlight bucket, so we'll call that good. Now we're on to our grommet. So there's two ways to do this. One way is the cheater way, and you take one of these sides and you just cut it. You can open it up, put it around your loom, and install it. So I think what we'll do for this one is we'll do the non-cheater way, where I'll just take the time and I'll fish each plug through this elongated slot. So we will start that now. Move it through. And it starts to get really full, but you're patient and pull the plugs through one at a time. It is not the end of the world. All right, so I've got that through. We're going to pull that back over the loom. Wire cover. All right, and then we will take the grommet, punch it in to the frame. There we go. So we've got our new grommet, got our wire harness. Now we can always gently, I'll put my hand in there, right, and push it through. We can feed ourselves some more, but it's a lot easier to pull more through than to try to pull it back. You can also use a little WD-40, spray it around the wires. That'll help out quite a bit. But right now, we are where we want to be. We've got our horn. That's where it needs to go. We've got perfect amount. Looks like I got it twisted there a little bit, but right there. So now we've got our harness pulled through. We've got our grommet installed. And then the next thing to do is to put our ignition switch in and to make sure we've got our wire harness laid down into let's call it the pinch seam or the main center line of the frame. And this all will get laid in here and plugged in to those components that we have down below. So now, again, I left the motor bolts are in through, but I've got them, there's no nuts on the backside. So if I need to, I can pull the top one out, I can tip the frame back if I got to get at any connections down on the bottom. But right now, I think this is probably a good spot to stop this video, because what we can do on the next one is we'll go through laying this in and where every one of this, looks like a rat's nest right now, where this lives, so it looks nice when you're done with your project. So I hope you liked the video. If you like these products, you can find more on mytrailbuddy.com. Till the next video, hope to see you there.